Okay then, I hope you find the session useful and informative, and I'll now hand over to Tom Legg.
Thank you, Louise, and welcome everybody. Today I'll briefly run through the areas we're going to cover in this webinar. So first, an overview of the benchmarks, what the process involves and why we think our new approach to benchmarking is the right one. Second, we'll go through 9 trends that we've so far identified from this year's results. These are preliminary findings, and we will explore them in a lot more detail in our full benchmarking report, which is launched at an event on the 11th of December. Third, we will announce the organizations listed in our top 10s for both Race to Opportunity and Opportunity Now. We'll then finish by answering some of the questions you sent us by typing into the chat function. So with me today are Helen Wells, Director of Opportunity Now, and Sandra Kerr, Director of Race to Opportunity, who will be discussing the importance and relevance of some of the key trends we've found. Before we look at the findings, I'll briefly explain the rationale for our benchmarks. There are 2 key differences between this year's benchmark and the previous ones. Firstly, it is the first time we've combined our race and gender benchmarks into a unified survey. Secondly, it is the first time we have collected detailed workforce metrics covering recruitment, retention, progression, and representation. So these are the outcomes we think all organizations should monitor in order to judge the success of their diversity work. To complement the outcomes, we spent considerable time assessing the policies and practices of our benchmarking participants. The objective of all of this is so that we can begin to say what actions and initiatives have the most effect on outcomes. So we are really excited by this approach. We'll now talk through some of the initial findings. So our first results is that women and BAME employees are significantly underrepresented the further up we go in an organization's hierarchy. And I'm showing the results now. So this data is really to set the scene. It shows the classic drop-off in representation for both women and ethnic minorities. The more senior, the less representation. For women at board level, there is a big difference between the proportion of non-executive directors, which is similar to the number of senior women, and the number of executive directors, which is smaller. However, Opportunity Now members have a significantly greater proportion of executive directors than is found in the FTSE 350. This is a significant result and shows that actions have started to pay off. For ethnic minorities, board representation sits at 5% and 4% for executive and non-executive directors respectively. We found that almost 60% of organizations had no BAME representation on their main board whatsoever. So we are interested in who leads organizations, as the people at the top can make a huge contribution to the overall culture of an organization. But we're also interested in how they got there and what steps organizations are taking to remove barriers for women and ethnic minorities as they progress in their careers. And that brings us on to our next point. So the current trend indicates that BAME representation will get worse in many organizations. So we found that ethnic minorities are being recruited at a higher rate than their current representation in the workforce overall. However, less than half of organizations surveyed are recruiting more BAME employees as a percentage of new recruits than is represented in their current workforce. This means that for some, there is a gap in recruitment, which could result in BAME representation declining in these workplaces. So demographic changes in the UK will mean that organizations with underrepresented BAME workforces will increasingly struggle to attract the best talent and struggle to provide the best service to their customers and clients. The lack of representation has significant social as well as commercial implications. However, some organizations are taking successful action to address this. So our third point is that better monitoring, target setting, and compulsory unconscious bias training correlates with greater rates of BAME recruitment. So we found that all organizations with over 15% BAME intake scored over 50% in the attraction section of our inputs benchmark. But what specific actions did they take that seemed to have an effect? Well, critically, they all scored more highly than organizations with lower recruitment in the advanced monitoring question. So these organizations are able to track the progress of all candidates from applications to recruitment. Successful organizations are also far more likely to set targets for the recruitment of BAME employees. So of these successful organizations, 50% set targets compared to only 36% of organizations with lower recruitment rates. But most significantly, half the organizations with the higher recruitment rates mandated unconscious bias training for those involved in interviewing and recruitment. But only 5% of organizations with low recruitment rates insisted on unconscious bias training. So Sandra, this is a really interesting result. Would you like to say anything?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Thank you, Tom, and hello to everybody. I'm really very interested in these results and kind of pleased to see them because, as you know, with Race to Opportunity, some of the things that we have been promoting is the importance of monitoring every stage of the recruitment process, and also the importance of having clear targets and goals for the demographic groups, for the different ethnicity groups, because that actually leads to relevant interventions where the progress or the target isn't met. And also, intuitively, we have suspected that unconscious bias awareness and training, particularly targeted at those at the front line and involved in every stage of the recruitment process, would yield dividends. And these results are showing that actually, obviously, there is some kind of clear correlation. So very excited about that. And as those of you who are at the dinner that we had recently know, that we have just recently launched the User Advisory Panel, whose role it is to help us look at recruitment as one of those strands, and to ask them to help us look at the employer strategies to see how better we can land them with young recruits. So really great results. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Sandra. So moving on to look at similar data but from a gender perspective, the next trend we found was that women are also more likely to be hired in organizations with mandatory unconscious bias training. So we checked to see if the trend was similar for women. So overall, the recruitment of women is not itself in the problem in the same way. Women are currently make up around 47% of the UK workforce, and they make up around 53% of the group counted as unemployed by official statistics. However, the concentration of women in low-paid jobs and part-time jobs is a source of inequality. So our current benchmark, we analysed the differences in success rates between men and women at the stages of shortlisting and hiring. This is a critical metric for organisations to capture because it really highlights any gaps in the way men and women fare in the recruitment process post-shortlisting. The causes of gaps can be varied and complex, and we urge all organisations to track and monitor recruitment at each stage as the first step in checking for biases. So in our analysis of steps organisations took to address any gaps, again we found that compulsory unconscious bias training appeared to correlate the most strongly with fairness in the recruitment process. So organisations where women were as successful at being hired as they were at being shortlisted were 8 times more likely to insist on unconscious bias training for their employees with responsibility for recruitment than those organisations in which women's success was not consistent between shortlisting and hiring. The final point is that mandatory unconscious bias training may be an effective method for making your interviewing process less prone to bias. I know Helen would really like to comment on this result as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, all. I just really wanted to re-emphasise how powerful this correlation is. It shows us that organisations that maintain a kind of consistent ratio of women across their kind of recruitment process, i.e. they keep the same number of women at every stage, from application, shortlisting to assessment, and then ultimately hire, are 8 times more likely to insist on compulsory unconscious bias training for their recruitment people. And I think this clearly and compellingly demonstrates that tackling and addressing the impact of assumptions, stereotypes and bias leads to a tangible increase in the number of women being hired. And although we've specifically looked at this correlation through the hiring process lens, I think the wider implications of this are very clear. Addressing bias in the people responsible for making people decisions has a very positive impact for women in your organization.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. So our next finding is that better ethnicity monitoring form disclosure rates correlates with higher BAME recruitment. So monitoring of ethnicity is of vital importance. Interestingly, we have found a correlation between the ethnicity monitoring disclosure rates and the proportion of BAME candidates recruited. So the top quartile of organizations in terms of their ethnicity monitoring disclosure rates recruit an average of 24% BAME employees, whereas the bottom quartile for disclosure rates recruited an average of 3% BAME candidates. We're not suggesting that trying to increase monitoring rates will affect an increase in BAME recruitment, but it appears that in organizations which are more diverse, there is a greater likelihood that people will be comfortable disclosing their ethnicity. If the disclosure rate is a proxy for a culture of openness, then maybe the BAME disclosure rate will correlate with other metrics. So indeed, we also found a relationship between the representation of women managers and the ethnicity monitoring disclosure rates, similar to the trends presented above. Sandra, monitoring is a really important area for RFO members, isn't it?
Absolutely, Tom. And this is a really important area because it is linked to transparency. It helps you to tell the message to your organization what action you're taking and why. And I think the very nature of the messages that you have to use to encourage people to monitor are quite positive and demonstrate a real resoluteness and commitment as an organization to make changes and monitor to see where things are working and where they're not. I think the second thing around the monitoring piece is where employers follow it up. So we've talked about monitoring recruitment, but we know also progression, perception, so the aggregating results of employer survey and publishing those results absolutely must help to foster a culture of openness and transparency. And then it also enables you to tell the stories about, you know, how important this is and what progress you're making because you know what the data tells you and where you need to make action, and also identify where maybe action still is required. But also I think the fourth part that can't be understated, it also helps you identify where your senior role models are and how you might put a focus on those particularly to make you an attractive employer to the wider world. So again, really excited by these results. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. And that brings us on nicely to the next point, which is that the more diverse your management team are, the more diverse your senior managers are. So we talked about recruitment and overall representation. We'll now focus on pipelines and progression of it. So looking at the representation of ethnic minorities and women at management and senior management levels, we see a strong correlation between who your managers are and who your senior managers are. Perhaps this result is not entirely unexpected. However, it highlights the overall importance of representation in your talent pipelines when it comes to getting more women and more ethnic minorities into your senior management positions. So the graph shown is the result for ethnic minorities, but the trend holds true for women as well, where senior management population is correlated with manager representation. So our full trends analysis will contain more assessments on what actions are effective at progressing women and ethnic minorities to management and senior management positions. But today we're simply saying act on your talent pipeline if you want to increase top-level diversity. In terms of specific actions, we have one initial finding that's of a long-standing interest to the campaign. So we found that 62% of organizations have carried out equal pay audits, and these organizations tend to have higher rates of senior women. So firstly, organizations who have carried out gender equal pay audits are more likely to have a better representation of women in senior management than organizations who don't carry out equal pay audits. And 62% of organizations carried out an equal pay audit within the last 3 years. So women are better represented at senior levels in organizations who have carried out a pay audit to the tune of 25.6% compared to a representation of only 19.5% in organizations that don't carry out equal pay audits. Helen, given the current findings, what do you have to say about the importance of pay audits?
Yeah, I mean, I think that correlation is a very strong one. I mean, the correlation between pay audits and a higher number of women in the senior ranks is very interesting. I mean, obviously, we are not saying it's necessarily a causal relationship in that one does not directly lead to the other. But I think what it really does demonstrate is that organisations that are committed to equality in their reward strategies are better at retaining and promoting their female talent, full stop. I mean, there is no doubt that the gap between men and women's pay in an organisation is a real kind of litmus test for wider structural and cultural barriers to equality. And organisations that commit the resources to do a detailed kind of pay audit know this and are therefore more likely to have higher levels of senior women than the organisations that don't carry out pay audits. I mean, what the data also told us is that opportunity employers are ahead of the game, as you would obviously expect, when it comes to looking at pay gap analysis. So 62% of the organisations that completed our benchmark had carried out a pay audit in recent years, compared to only 43% of a national average for larger organisations. And I think what this really tells us is that our members are much more likely to have a reward strategy in place, which gives their people the confidence that they are being paid in accordance with their abilities and their role and not their sex. So a huge well done.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sandra, pay audits are really important for women, but what about the effect on ethnic minorities in the workplace?
Yes, Tom, I think this is something that really does need to be explored. When we published Race to Progress in 2011, we found that everyone, so it really didn't matter ethnicity, gender, where they lived, sexuality, age, whatever, everybody wanted proper pay. Everybody wanted some transparency around that. So I think there's definitely a need to look at that across all the diversity strands, probably. But also, the second thing I would say when looking at pay audits around ethnicity is look at pay audit, appraisal, performance reward in the round, and see it around parities and what the results around markings and things are looking like. And I suppose the third thing that I would say is really also important, that we know there's information out there, and I'm kind of part of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that's looking at poverty and ethnicity, and the initial findings are looking like ethnic minority young children and young people are more likely to be living in poverty. So I think there's really a real kind of imperative also on that responsible business piece to scrutinize that area.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on now to talk about flexible working. We know flexible working is a key enabler for allowing women's continued successful participation in the labour market. We've carried out some preliminary analysis into the link between flexible working and turnover. So turnover is a critical business issue. Not only does it have a high cost, but it can be an excellent indicator of how attractive a workplace is to different groups. The loss of talented women can be an issue for many organisations. Businesses need to retain and progress their women if the senior manager group, board and directors are to be more diverse. So we found that organisations with higher levels of flexible working of all types for men and women showed lower voluntary turnover rates. The exception is those organisations with extremely low levels of female voluntary turnover. But in general, women in organisations who have lower levels of flexible working are more likely to vote with their feet and leave. However, the message is clear. An organisation that makes itself attractive to women in the long term by having high levels of flexible working for all is less likely to lose valuable female resource. Individuals sometimes struggle to analyse the benefits of flexible working. We aim to partially do this for you, as we now have a lot of interesting data on the types of flexible workers, and we will link this to business performance, recruitment, retention, and representation in our full trends analysis. So our final trend before we announce the top 10 looks at turnover and ethnic minorities. So we found that organisations with higher turnover of ethnic minority employees have lower rates of promotion for this group, except in organisations with the lowest turnover rates who also have some of the lower rates of progression. So our interpretation is that for organisations with hardly any turnover, there is less likely to be chance of progression, or there are fewer jobs to move into. But there does appear to be a sweet spot where the right level of turnover allows people to move up. but not too many people to just leave the business altogether. But in the war for talent, this is really important because better identification of high potential individuals from within your organization is a far more sustainable approach than headhunting staff from other organizations, which really just leads to salary inflation, higher turnover, and disruption. So our trends analysis will look at whether women and ethnic minorities appear to be overlooked as the hierarchy data and progression data seems to indicate. We will identify what steps successful organizations are taking to reduce turnover and increase progression rates. So that brings us to the end of our preliminary trend analysis today. But before we talk about the top 10, I'll briefly mention what we're going to cover in the full analysis. For the starter, we'll look at what strategies can affect recruitment rates, the link between accountability and diversity performance, inclusive leadership and the effect on organizational performance, the link between performance at appraisal and the representation of ethnic minorities and women at senior management levels and management levels, the link between diversity performance and business performance. So we really hope you found the initial results interesting. I'll now hand over to Helen to announce the Opportunity Now top 10s.
Have we prepared a fanfare? Huge congratulations to the organisations identified on the screen. You really should be commended, not only for the action you are taking, but also for the impact that action is having. So the results you're seeing in terms of metrics and representation across the organisation. So a very, very huge well done to those organisations on the screen. And I just wanted to touch on actually what are the things that those organisations are doing that have in the broadest sense that has meant that they're in the top 10. And I think there were some sort of clear sort of trends that we saw. So, for example, they were more likely to set targets for female progression and have senior accountability for actually delivering on those targets. They were more likely to have innovative and impactful business cases which were very well communicated and understood, and which actually put diversity at the heart of what the business does, as a sort of business solution. They were more likely to have inclusive design as a component of product or service delivery process. They were more likely to equip their people managers with expertise and in how to lead and manage inclusively. They were also more likely to carry out equal pay audits. They were more likely to really assess and track their promotion data by gender through a gender lens. We've talked about unconscious bias training. Again, these organisations were much more likely to have that as an integral part of ensuring that there wasn't bias in the recruitment process. They were also more likely to set public targets and to publicly report on workforce composition. But I know that we're going to go into a lot more detail on some of those sort of case studies and examples of best practice at the live event. So we will keep you hanging on to that. Sandra.
Okay, so we are now unveiling the top 10 for Race Opportunity, and I am smiling because I do want to commend you all for participating in the benchmark in a time where we're at tough economic times. Employers can say, oh, this is too difficult and we're not going to step forward. But we're really pleased to, I'm really pleased to see your organizations listed, and you should be very pleased as well. Some key things that we've already talked about today that we've found in some of your organizations are about targeted interventions and development programs with a focus, work with suppliers, really thinking about how you can benefit ethnic minority or BME-owned companies, and work with your recruitment suppliers, and actually looking at communities and customers, so really important as well, and also engaging with community groups in a way that's inclusive. So really kind of great results. We will obviously go into more details on this, but actually we found many of you in this group, and most of you will have clear, defined, rationale, business case on race. Why are we doing this? Board level accountability, somebody at the senior level who actually cares and can take responsibility and is responsible for promoting this. And also the thing that you've heard me go on a lot about is de-aggregating diversity surveys by race, trying to understand ethnicity, what are your employees thinking. So huge congratulations. I look forward to, I'm sure, no doubt, seeing you in the rounds as I go around. So a really well done to you.
Great. So now Laura is going to manage our kind of question session.
Thanks everyone for listening so far. We've had some really great questions come through, and we're going to try and answer those, as many of those as we can now. If we don't get to your question, please do consider contacting your account manager or the team just to ask any technical questions about the benchmarking process. But one interesting question that has come through already is to ask what the panel's views are on setting targets. In particular, the question was asked about BAME staff, that's Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, being particularly concerned that it's more of a quota and that they're not getting their roles on merit. So Sandra, if I could ask you to respond to that one.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laura, for that question, and whoever asked it. You know, way out of the gate, there's something tough. But let me just talk about a few things. So demographic data. So the importance of knowing what the landscape looks like, what the talent pool there is to play for, is really important and helps to transparency as to why would we bother, why would we care. The second piece is this morning I was with the Minister of State for Employment. Those of you who heard me announce that I'm now working with them more closely, and the employment gap does exist for ethnic minority people and the wider population, and there is a kind of a real monitoring of that gap, and I want to see that closed. And that's because recognizing that talent in the UK has all the complexities of diversity, and we want to ensure we're engaging that. And some of these are the messages that have to be kind of important to land this new organization. And actually, it's illegal. There's no way. And who would want to give somebody a job just because of their ethnicity and skin color, because that would set them up to fail. So you're not going to just get the job for that anyway. We are looking for the skills and talents from all of the UK workforce, which is also the changing marketplace, which is your customers, and there's value of gaining better insight, your communities, about those that you operate in and who live and work around you, and also the need to tap into different thinking on product development. And last thing I would say that, you know, the targets, benchmarks, goals are there as guidelines, and it helps you to see if you are penetrating the full talent pool that's available in the UK. Now, I appreciate this is probably a masterclass in itself or some kind of guidance, so this is not going to be everything, but it's just some of the messages that we need to think about that you include in your organisation.
Thank you, Sandra. And Helen, do you have a view on setting targets and quotas in
I do indeed. At Opportunity Now, for probably 20 years now, we have advocated setting targets as a really powerful mechanism for driving change. It's an aspiration. It's where you want to get to. And I think it's really important to couch that target very much in the why. So talking about why it's a commercial imperative, you know, why it will make your business better. What are the reasons that you want to change the sort of the current status or demographic of your workplace. So, you know, I actually think targets, you know, that great adage, you know, what gets measured gets done, and actually if there's a publicly set target, then people work towards it. So, you know, I'm actually a great believer in targets, but they are different from quotas. So, you know, a target is an aspiration, a quota is an absolute, and you know, at Opportunity Now, we don't really think that quotas are the way to create change, because they don't promote buy-in or understanding of some of the causes behind some of the numbers.
Thank you. We also have another question that is very easy to answer, so I'm going to tackle that myself. Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation? Yes, it is. It will be on the website after the webinar is finished. I have another question for Sandra, but I'd be interested to get Helen's view as well. One of the questions we've been asked is, what do organisations who aren't currently recruiting at the moment, how do they tackle creating opportunities for their BAME staff in particular, when there's a bit of a recruitment freeze going on?
Okay, I would say one of the key things that I've been trying to promote for a while, so I'm going to use this little soapbox. I think there's a huge opportunity to promote volunteering. I think where roles that exist around project management, leadership, where that may not be in someone's day job, there's a huge opportunity through volunteering to enable people to demonstrate the use of those skills. And I think that as employers, if you can put that in the skills portfolio, build it into what a good leader does in your organization, give it some credibility and currency, you can not only fulfill your commitment to responsible business and actually increase your presence in the community, with those communities as an employer that cares, but actually enable people to demonstrate and build skills and talents that will have currency internally when they look to apply for other roles.
Helen, do you have a view on that as well?
I do. So the question was actually, how do you create opportunities when you're not hiring or promoting? And I think it's important to think of sort of individuals' careers not always as an onwards and upwards. You know, there are lots of things you can do around job satisfaction, training, mentoring, connecting people across the organisation, which is not just about onwards and upwards, but it's about making your organisation better connected and feeling more productive and engaged.
Thank you. And Tom, if I can just level a question at you, what can members do next in terms of getting more information about the benchmarking findings?
They can sign up to our live event on December the 11th, and they can also download our full trends analysis when that is published on the same day. And I believe we'll be running more webinars in the new year to discuss particular areas of interest in a lot more detail.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, because I've covered the majority of them there, I will hand over to Louise to finalise the call.
Okay, there was one question that I can cover off in terms of logistics, practical stuff. Somebody's asked if there will be an audio recording available from this session. We're going to try our best. We have had some issues with sound quality in the past, but hopefully if we have something that is legible, then we'll be delighted to make that available as well. So as Laura's already mentioned, the slides will be available on the website probably by the end of the week, so we can keep you posted to let you know that they are there. And there's some final headline details on the event on the 11th. The event is on the Opportunity Now website on the event section, so please do feel free to book on there. Places might be limited, so I would encourage you to do that as quickly as possible. And there ends our session for today. Thank you very much again for joining us, and I hope you found the session useful. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.